what I hope that you take away from tonight is a deeper understanding or a better understanding of how the governor navigates governing the state. How do you balance the demands and the realities of running this place with staying true to the values of who you are? You are more, obviously, than a governor. You are a husband, you're a father. And so I hope you leave with a better understanding of that. I first met you, and I'm not sure if you remember this conversation, but we first talked a couple years ago, and I was on the road. I was driving back from Prescott, Arizona. I was up there covering a story about the Yarnell Hill fire, and I was about 35 minutes out. My phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number, and I picked up, because if you know me, that's what I do. I always pick up my phone, and it annoys everyone around me, but I do it. And I did what any journalist did after you told me that you were going to file, or I think you had just filed your exploratory papers to run for governor. I pulled over at the nearest rest stop, and I filed a story. And since then, I have filed a lot of stories in very unusual places. I'm not going to spare you the details, but a lot of places. I don't sleep much because I keep one eye open on to watch out for his Twitter account. He's constantly tweeting news, as he did this morning with the announcement of his appointment of Clint Bullock to the Supreme Court. So thank you so much for getting my day started with that.
We made some news today.
You made some news today. So you are arguably the most important man in Arizona. So I have to ask you this question. Do you ever Google yourself?
I have Googled myself. Of course, I think if you're going to run for office, you want to know what's being said. Yes.
So people have some burning questions then about you. They want to know, are you Republican?
Yes, I am.
Are you related to Joe Ducey?
Yes, I am.
Who is Joe Ducey?
Joe Ducey is my son. He's my middle son.
And are you LDS?
I am not LDS.
What are you?
I'm Catholic.
Okay. How much are you worth? That's a serious question. People want to know.
I don't know. I don't know what it says on the internet.
You don't know how much you're worth, or you don't want to say how much you're worth?
I don't know what it says on the internet. I said I don't know what it says on the internet.
Okay. Well, that's just a question that they want to know. What's your approval rating?
I think, isn't it around 41% or something like that?
Around 40? That's a pretty
I think 41%. I've only seen two numbers since I was elected, and I do think, I'm a numbers individual, and I think that you're either going the right direction or the wrong direction. So, right direction of the state is important to me, a little more important than my personal approval rating. I'm somewhat surprised sometimes that I think many people don't know who the governor is. I mean, a lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. So I look at the right direction, wrong direction of the state.
And you think you're going in the right direction?
I think we're making progress. We're off to a good start. It's been a fast year. I think there's a lot more to do.
So a couple of months ago, I accompanied you down to Cochise County, and we were with Sheriff Mark Daniels, and he wanted to stop at Circle K for a Polar Pop. I think you got a water, if I remember correctly. But I remember seeing you couldn't go anywhere. You could not walk freely without people asking you for autographs, people asking you to take photos. How has this adjustment to this life been? How have you adjusted?
Well, I mean, we had quite a big group of people that day. You remember we were with the Department of Public Safety, we were with the sheriff, we were with the Arizona Republic. So I think we stood out. I mean, there's many places that I go that people don't recognize me at all. And if they do, if they want to talk, I'm happy to talk. But I'm, like you said, I mean, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I have 3 boys, and that's most important to me. I look at this as my responsibility as governor, but I think a lot of times on the weekends, people are very nice. Sometimes I can almost tell if someone doesn't like me or my policies. It's like they walk the other way or avert their eyes. And I'm not trying to tempt fate, but no one has come up to me personally and been rude. We did have one Sunday afternoon after Mass. My boys wanted to go to Chipotle before all the issues happen. They love Chipotle. I think they could eat it every day. And so we were all, 5 of us were there, and somebody came up to me and said, hey, will you come take a picture with my sons? And I said, sure. I said, do you mind if I finish eating and then I'll come take a picture? And so 10 minutes later, I went over and we took a picture. And he said, I really think that's cool. I want to tell you, I didn't vote for you, but that was really nice. And I said, you know, you are the first person in 6 months that has told me that you didn't vote for me. I kept telling my wife it should have been a bigger margin, but so people have been nice.
Well, how have you adjusted? I mean, I cannot imagine you were this popular, no offense, when you were the Cold Stone Creamery CEO or when you were state treasurer. I mean, who wants to glad hand with the treasurer? Again, no offense. But how have you adjusted? I mean, did you have a coach? Have you have people who help prep you for this is what life is going to be like, and your sons and Angela?
Well, it definitely has been an adjustment. And I have had my wife, Angela, said to me a couple of times, I knew you before you were popular. And I think that's a good message to remember. And I think part of this business is just being yourself. So when in doubt, you know, follow your instincts and be yourself. It has been a transition. I mean, it really didn't hit me because the campaign is such a brutal pursuit the entire time. And then once the primary was over and the general was over, then you get security, and that's an adjustment.
So be honest. You like to drive. Have you ditched your security yet?
I do like to drive. I want to be responsible. My security has a responsibility, but I do like to drive. I find that the conversation is a little better when I'm driving in the car and security's following.
So you haven't ditched them. You've just allowed them to trail you while you drive.
They'll know my schedule. They'll know where I'm going. I mean, typically during the business day, I'm always with them. But if I'm taking one of my sons to practice or picking him up or dropping him off at the airport, I like to drive now and again. You know, it's kind of funny because we were leaving our driveway one day on the way to Mass, and my son Joe, who is 16, said to me, he goes, gosh, how do these guys know where to follow you every time you leave? And I said, the same way they know how to follow you every time you leave. And he just looked at me, and he didn't know if I was serious or not.
Well, looking back on your first year, what is a surprising thing that you have done that you're most proud of? Kind of beyond the things that we read about every day. What might surprise people about what you're most proud of?
Well, I mean, I am most proud of Proposition 123 and that we're taking that to the ballot. I don't want that to get lost in the fact that we had success in the legislative session, because we really haven't accomplished anything until we have success on May 17th. And I do think that will be hard to do. I think this is a crazy political environment. Just look at what's going on in the primaries and how angry people are in many ways for good and real reasons. So I am proud of that. I'm proud that we were able to balance the budget. It was a lot of difficult decisions. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of that people aren't seeing is the changes that we're making inside government, the agency heads that we're putting in charge, and really have a focus on streamlining and making these government services work and work better. It will take a little while for that to become apparent to the people in the audience and the citizens, but that's what I see every day. And when I talk to our chief operating officer, Henry Darwin, who's been inside state government for 18 years and knows his way around very well, I think we're making a lot of good progress.
So can you take me to a moment or a small victory or a meeting or a time that you were sitting down with Henry or one of your agency heads and they gave you an example of a victory, of something that lined up with your agenda and something that you can feel proud of, that people might not read about on azcentral.com, haven't yet maybe. Mm-hmm. Can you take me to something that goes beyond those headlines?
Well, there's been a number of times, and I hear this rather often, where I will go out to agencies and they haven't had a governor visit there in some time. And I don't look at that as anything special. To me, the idea of secret shopping or dropping in, it's not to catch people doing something wrong. It's quite the opposite. It's to catch people doing something right, or to try to set the culture of how we want to operate and the way I would like to lead. But I do think that idea of getting involved, making sure the agency heads are there, and I think I shared with you, Yvonne, and Michael, just so you know, I am a subscriber, a longtime subscriber. And I get the paper, and I get and now I'm reading it much more often digitally, and I am interested in what is written. And there was an editorial written about the long wait times at the Department of Motor Vehicles. And by coincidence, my driver's license picture had expired. And I hadn't been inside a DMV in 7 or 8 years. So when you're the governor and your driver's license picture expires, they make it kind of easy on you to get a new picture. But when I saw that there were these long wait times at DMV, I thought, I want to see this for myself. And this was in the first few months of my administration. So I said, rather than go in the back way, I want to just go to the closest DMV, which was the one on 19th Avenue in McDowell. It's a big DMV. And we stopped in front, and I took off my coat, and I took off my tie, and I walked in. It was late in the afternoon, and I'm going to tell you, not one person in there knew who I was.
How is that possible? Doesn't your picture hang on the wall?
There was a big picture of me on the wall. But I just, you can tell when
Right.
people know and people didn't know. So I got my ticket at 4:24, and I went and sat down, and I was called. It's a 3-step process. That's step 1. I was called to the second step at 4:28, so 4 minutes later. Went and got my picture taken, came back and sat down, and I was just checking email on my phone, and some guy was walking by me, and he stopped, and he said, I know you. I watch a lot of TV, and I know you. And I said, hi, I'm Doug Ducey. And he said, how do I know you? And he was talking just a little louder than you wish he was talking, so everyone in DMV was looking at us now. And I said, well, you may know me because I ran for governor. And he goes, I did know that. I watch a lot of TV, and I'm very informed. And I said, well, nice to meet you. And he shook my hand, and he started to walk away, and he stopped, and he turned back around. And he said, I'm sorry. And I said, what for? And he said, that you lost. And I said, actually, I won. And he said, what are you doing in here? And I was called at 4:38 for the last step, so I was there 14 minutes. Not Cold Stone throughput time, but I thought it was a pretty good time. I know the reports are that we haven't improved that dramatically, but I don't think there's any substitute for getting inside the agencies, actually doing the government services yourself, and then be able to provide feedback. And I expect that of people on my team and the agency heads as well.
So I know the things that keep me up at night, right? Like I worry about my kids a lot. I worry about my parents a lot. I worry about things like this a lot. What keeps you up at night?
Well, I mean, I have those same worries as well. I mean, my kids, my family, my parents, I have teenagers. They're teenagers like any other teenagers. But then in state government, I work off a sheet of paper. I've always been a list maker. I believe in having a to-do list and checking things off throughout the day. And it's a plans and priorities list. If I would have known then what I know now, I would have named it a plans, priorities, emergencies, and distractions list. Because you can have the agenda of what you want to accomplish, but then things like flash floods in Mesa happen, or freeway shootings happen, these types of things. So you read the news in an entirely different way. And you turn on the news and you check your phone or Twitter as to, has anything gone wrong that I'll need to act on or deal with. So those are the types of things that I think don't really allow you deep sleep.
So from your new vantage point, do you think that the news reflects what's actually going on in state government?
Yes, I do. I do.
Are there worse things that are happening that we need to know?
No, I want to say that I think that, and the people that work with the Republic know this. I mean, I think it's incredibly important to have a paper of record. I mean, just think if we didn't. I mean, how would you know what happened? By going on Facebook? Or by looking at the blogs, of each extreme. So I do think it is. I think, though, it's also going through a transformation. I mean, the amount of reporters, the amount of investigative work that you can do. But in terms of the facts and what's happening at the state capitol, whether it's the Republic reporting on the bigger stories and themes of the week and the year, and then you have the Capitol Press there as well, and they're kind of following every back and forth.
We kind of stalk you.
Yes. Yes.
So we do have real problems, right?
Yes, we do.
We have real problems. So let's talk a little bit about education. This has been was a theme during your campaign.
Yes.
This is a key theme in your first year, and clearly it's going to be a big priority throughout your tenure. In many people's minds, we are not spending enough on K through 12 education. We have dramatically reduced the amount of money that we are putting into our state universities. Our graduation rates could be a heck of a lot better. Business leaders worry about this. Parents worry about this. Do you worry about this?
Yes, I do worry about this. And I think the biggest impact that a governor can have on a state is the K-12 education system. This is something that is not done by the federal government. Of course, the federal government's got their hands and they are involved in many, many things, but this is a state responsibility. So I was committed to this. I would say there were 3 planks that I ran on: moving our economy forward, restoring our K-12 education system. And I personally think we have a great place to live. And I think our reputation is important, and I want people to see our state the way we see our state as citizens here. But I even more now believe in K-12 education. All the things that the governor has to deal with, that likely we won't touch on all of it tonight, but all the problems of public policy, from homelessness to unemployment to crime to the problems at the Department of Child Safety to our prison population, could be improved so dramatically, if not solved, by a better K-12 education system. I used to say on the campaign trail that when you have a kid and they're 5 years old and they don't know much, they're pretty cute. When they're 12 years later, when they're 17 and they don't know much, they're not very cute. So what happens during those ensuing 12 years, and how can we make certain that our kids in the state of Arizona know something of value that they can either apply in higher education or in career and technical training or in a fulfilling career?
But even with Prop 123, let's say that passes, and for those who might not be as familiar with it, this would infuse an additional $3.5 billion
$3.5 billion over 10 years, yes.
When you break it down, that's about $300 a student. How does that move the needle? How does that assure parents that this is going to make a real difference in their families' lives?
So I want to say that all Prop 123 is, at the beginning, is additional resources into our schools. I do think in many ways we've got an inferiority complex in our state around what we do right. There are many places where we are providing an excellent public education. You've heard me talk that we have 3 of the top 10 public high schools in the nation. When I go back to that National Governors Conference and we all sat around the big U table and it's on C-SPAN and you scroll right past it, when they talk about excellence in education, Arizona has a spotlight on it. 3 of the top 10 public high schools, there's only one other governor in the country that has that type of bragging right. We also, with the open enrollment and school choice, you'll hear a lot of people saying, I like my child's school, but I think the rest of education is doing terrible. It's not exactly accurate. In our metropolitan areas, we are doing a good job. I will tell you, in our areas of high free and reduced lunch, of low income and high poverty, this is where we need help. This is where we need more resources. And each school can use additional resources, but these schools are not getting the scores of other schools.
So you have made a lot of promises when it comes to resources. Have you been frustrated by the speed at which you have or haven't been able to get some of these promises enacted?
Well, I have a high sense of urgency, so I always want to go faster. But when I do go too fast, sometimes you hit me, like on the budget, we went too fast. I said, what are we waiting for? The budget's been out there 8 weeks. There hasn't been an alternative plan put in front of me, and it's time that we finally balance the budget. I think if you look at the reporting, it would say he went too fast. It was a cram down. And I understand that. I actually think we'll do a better job in terms of communicating everything that's in the budget. There will be more public hearings. We're in a different situation from a cash position. The May 17th date that we chose on special election was as fast as we could realize. I've been in office 1 year and 1 day. And when I came into office, there was an ongoing lawsuit which the governor was not a party to. Now, you can't really say that, because nobody wants to hear that the governor's not a party to it. You're the elected leader, and people expect you to lead. So as soon as those negotiations broke down, we did wade in with legislative leadership and the education community, and we came up with a solution which most people thought was impossible, which is Proposition 123. We had to pass it through the House and the Senate in a special session. I give tremendous gratitude to President Andy Biggs and Speaker David Gowan and the education community for making that happen. But now we have to go to the voters, and we have to have that passed.
Let's say it passes. Mm-hmm. Are you committed to getting additional resources to schools?
I'm committed to education, and I think that resources are part of the equation, Yvonne. I also think reforms are part of the equation. Now, I was talking with Brian and Sean when I came in here. They own this wonderful place, and it's terrific. It's off to a good start. It's been here 2 years. And let me just speak as a small business owner. Our schools are going to have an infusion of $3.5 billion additional dollars over the next 10 years. That's a very happy circumstance of hundreds of millions of dollars next year that they didn't have this year. There are a lot of people out there that are concerned, saying that money won't be properly spent. Right. It won't make a difference. Well, I intend for it to make a difference. I want it to supply better results, better reading at the 3rd grade level, better math at the 8th grade level. So before I start negotiating for more money beyond $3.5 billion, let's win on May 17th. Let's put these hundreds of millions of dollars for next school year into the school system, and then let's talk about what resources are needed.
What about for universities? $99 million was cut from their budgets last year. Are we going to see any of that put back? Your son, your oldest son, is in college. You know what that bill looks like? I
do know what that bill looks like. I want to say, first, our universities are doing excellent. I mean, here we are in the shadow of the new American university. Arizona State University was called by U.S. News and World Report as the most innovative university in the country. The New York Times called it the gold standard of honors colleges. I give an incredible amount of credit to Dr. Michael Crow for doing that. There were tough decisions that were needed in the budget, but I do believe, and I'm not here to show you my budget for next year or to give the state of the state, but you can be hopeful that we can turn the trend line in a positive direction for spending in universities.
Okay, well, speaking of trend lines, over the last year, we have seen some disturbing trend lines when it comes to child welfare. The numbers appear to have worsened when it comes to the number, they've clearly worsened when it comes to the number of uninvestigated neglect and abuse cases. The number of children, I think we're at 19,000, who are in state care. You're a dad. how do you help these families? How do you fix this?
Yvonne, you've touched on the one area that does keep me up the most at night, the one that I have the most concern for, and it is our Department of Child Safety. These are the kids that are the most vulnerable and in the toughest situation. We have over 18,000 children that are in the care of the state at this time. It's incredible to think that 18,000 children have parents that are unfit to raise them. This is an agency that has been broken for years. And there was a special session before I was elected that removed the child protective safety out of the Department of Economic Safety and made it a standalone agency that reports directly to the governor. There are things that I would have done differently.
What specifically?
Well, what I want to say is, but what I have to focus on at this point in time are the things that I believe can work, and the idea that I appoint that director reports directly to me and my office are the first thing in terms of fixing it. And you know, at Cold Stone Creamery, and just let me for 1 second give a private sector analogy to what's going on in the government. In business, if you're profitable, it's one number. But if you're profitable, it allows you to claim success. It allows you to hire more people, pay them, take on additional space, open new restaurants, whatever that is. In government, this is what makes, I think, public policy difficult, and especially good management. There's never just one number. People say, what's the one number that will make Department of Child Safety work? And I talk about these 18,000 plus children. Well, you can reduce that number rather quickly if you're putting children back into dangerous situations. So you do want to focus on the safety of the child. You want to have them in a permanent situation where they have stability. And then when possible, you do want this family reunification. Sometimes it's not possible.
So is it time in your mind then to talk about what is success with DCS? Is it time for new metrics?
Well, I believe it's time for us to shine a light on the metrics that we want to achieve. One of it will be reducing that backlog. It will be reducing the kids that are in the care of the state. And it's also being transparent with that. I mean, there's no way that you're ever going to check the box. We've been able to eliminate a number of agencies in state government to make it more effective, more efficient, more streamlined. We're always going to have a Department of Child Safety. We're always going to have parents that are unfit to raise their children. Are there more bad parents today than when I was a kid? I don't really know. I think there have always been very difficult situations for whatever reasons. The other thing that I see in this agency and across so much of the other categories that I said we don't normally talk about is drug abuse and addiction. And you have people that I don't think had a child with the intention of not being able to care for that child, but they are impaired daily.
Greg McKay, you installed him about a year ago.
Yes.
Almost a year ago.
Almost a year ago.
You stand by him. You stand by his leadership. Take us to what some of those meetings, those one-on-one meetings might look like when you're looking at these numbers and you're hearing about these horrific cases, or maybe cases that aren't so horrific. Maybe you're questioning, should these children be removed from these homes? Are these parents unable to adequately care for their children? What are those like?
I would say that meetings with me are, I'm going to ask direct questions and I'm going to want candid answers. You saw my memo on how I like to work with people. I know that there's going to be bad news in many of these situations, especially as we're having turnarounds, but I want people to be candid and upfront, and I don't want to be surprised. I do walk out every morning, and I'm going to I think I ran into you or another member of the press in an open mic situation 150 times in this last year, which is pretty much every business day of the year. So I want to be informed on what's happening, and then I want to have confidence that there's a direction. I want all of our agency heads, whether it's Department of Child Safety or Department of Motor Vehicles, to know what their mission is. I mean, why do they exist, and what do they want to accomplish? And then I also think it's important that they have their metrics. And we're really remaking state government in terms of metrics. And this is not to point fingers or talk about anyone that came before me, but I think there's a number of things that, you know, the policy and politics, what you run on, what I'm going to talk about in State of the State, what we'll try to accomplish in this legislative session. That's why you run for office. That's fun. That's the stuff you report on and read. Economic development, that's what a governor can do to compete against other governors. Working on the stuff inside government, actually making the government work, the $27 billion that flows through our government, the 35,000 employees, the 40-plus agencies, the 220 boards and commissions. That's what we're working on.
So let's talk a little bit about those employees. You have told many of them, and I know at least the people over at DES, that it is their responsibility as public servants to take care of the most vulnerable. At the same time, you signed a budget that limited cash benefits for poor families, the poorest families in the state, to 1 year. You have called for a complete ban of refugees to Arizona in the wake of the terrorist attacks. That's something you can't do without federal approval, but you've asked for it. So how do you reconcile? You got a lot of criticism for that. Like, what does he want us to do? How do you do both? How do you reconcile that?
So let's unpack a bit of that. That's a lot there, and I think that accuracy is important here. So on the benefits, and I am a believer in our social safety net. I think as the richest, prosperous, most powerful country in the history of the world, our people should have a safety net. And that's what I want to see happen. What I don't want to see happen is that safety net to become a lifestyle or a way of life. So what we've done in terms of the decisions we've made around benefits is it's different for disabled people or homeless people, who are in a more vulnerable situation. But we do want to see people be able to get a job. We want to see them enter the economy. I don't think that any able-bodied adult wants to be on government assistance. So we're going to work to transition people from those benefits into employment, into education, or into volunteering or training. And I think there's some states that have done this better than we have in Arizona. I think we are a state that works. It's a state where common sense makes sense still to people. And that's how we did the reforms on those benefits. Now, regarding refugees, okay, I talked about a pause in refugees. And, you know, from the standpoint of what my discussion with the Department of Economic Security, basically our social safety net, they are mission-driven. Director Jeffries is mission-driven to help the most vulnerable. And I love the spirit that he has brought there. I mean, I personally hired him. But public safety is my number one priority and concern. So when the events did happen in San Bernardino, and the discussion was, how do you vet people that don't have any presentable paperwork, I did call for a pause, and I did receive an incredible amount of criticism. I think it was the prudent thing to do in this setting, and I stand by that. Thank you.
Going back to the welfare benefits, do you see any circumstance in which you might change your mind on that?
Well, the way it will work, Yvonne, is we have people will be a part over the next year of this social safety net. Let us put our reforms in place that will, you know, I think there's one side of the equation that thinks we'll give a person a check and we've given them a check, we've done our duty. I look at it as we need to present that person a check, and then we need to go to work. We need to show them different employment opportunities. If that's not going to work, we need to look at different training opportunities or educational opportunities, or they need to be out and about. And I'm a big believer that with Director Jeffries and our economy and the opportunities that will be there, we'll go from making this a lifestyle to where people can actually support their life.
So what I'm hearing from you is that we might see more on this front. in some way, shape, or form?
Well, I think whenever you're making decisions in public policy, you want to go the right direction. I mean, I talk a lot about the quality of life in the state of Arizona. I really do believe life is better here. We have a better place to live than so many other parts of the country. So when you make these decisions, talking to people who are in the toughest type of situation, you want to do it so you get results. And you fairly posed the question. But I heard a question today of someone who said that you're just doing that so you can reward your rich buddies. Well, untrue and wrong premise. This is something where I don't want to grow our social welfare system. I'm not going to mark our success by how many people we hand a government check to. I'm going to mark our success by how many people no longer need a government check because they're earning their own check.
And 1 year in your mind for a lot of these people is long enough to get up, to pull themselves up, to get off of the lowest rung of the ladder and to pull themselves up.
I believe 1 year is it's a long time in what has been the recent past, and we'll know a year from now.
So Friday is the anniversary of the shootings in Tucson, where 6 people died, 13 people were injured, including Gabby Giffords. Mm-hmm. 2 days from now, I'm sure you're going to order the flags be lowered. I'm going to take my boys to school, and on my drive-in, like many of you will do, I'm going to remind myself that my children know what to do at school if there's a lockdown, if someone gets on campus with a gun. Since that day, there have been no real changes to Arizona gun laws that could prevent someone who is inclined to carry out a mass shooting from getting a gun. Might you consider changing that?
Yvonne, this is, I remember that day very well also, and where I was, and I've gotten to know Gabby through this process, and Mark Kelly, and they're in our family thoughts and prayers, and to see the progress that she's made is heartwarming. That is probably my biggest fear and concern as a governor. When I see the breaking news and what's happening across the country. So I always want to go from a position of safety first when it comes to these questions. And this is a big discussion, and it's another discussion where I think people want to see a law passed for whatever reason, but they're not talking about a law that would have prevented what happened in Tucson or Newtown or Columbine or other places. Part of this is getting guns out of the hands of bad people, but also we're talking about a mental health issue as well.
So might we see some big policy changes when it comes to services for the mentally ill, or trying to address that from that angle?
Well, yes, we are going to talk about the state services, the state hospital. There have been some dramatic issues over the last year, working very closely with agency heads and what went wrong and what needs to go better, and then how that happens, how someone finds themselves there, those types of things. These are all things that happen inside of government, and I think of it as something we want to do better on and have the safety and responsibility inside our state.
So earlier today, very early this morning, you announced Clint Bullock of the Goldwater Institute as your first Supreme Court pick. And this is someone who has written very publicly in favor of judicial activism. He has made the case for that. Mm-hmm. Do you expect him to be any sort of activist while he's on the bench?
Well, I think if you look at Clint's writing in context, he talks about the activism of maintaining the law, of staying to the plain letter text of the law, especially when judges have made their own judgments outside of the law. So an activism to head towards or back to the state constitution or to the federal constitution. I expect Clint to be an excellent justice. I expect him to understand the separations of power and what the duty of a jurist is, and I think he'll be excellent at it. There were 7 incredibly qualified people of the highest caliber that were presented to me by the commission, and I interviewed every single one of them, and there were a number of them that could have been named as a Supreme Court justice, but Clint was the best.
So it sounds like you've had this conversation with him.
Had this it's a pretty thorough interview process. Mm-hmm. I think you'd be proud of it, Yvonne.
Well, perhaps he can be our next Headlines Live guest. Talking about tax cuts, this has been a big platform for you, too. This is one of your mantras on the campaign trail, and in your first year, are we going to see tax cuts this year?
Well, I would look at it as tax reform. And if you think reform is
are we going to see tax cuts?
Reform is a word that's used a lot in public policy. To me, it means improvement, and I do believe that we should have a lower tax base. And so, yes, you will see incremental tax cuts.
You're giving your State of the State address on Monday.
Oh, yeah. I am giving it on Monday. I'm not giving it tonight.
Oh, okay. Can you give us any hints? Anything? Give us a nugget. Just throw us a breadcrumb.
We are going to tell you our legislative agenda for 2016. And if you think 2015 was eventful, you haven't seen anything yet.
Do you see what I have to deal with? Seriously? This is what it's like pulling. So many phone calls I have to make a day, which is why I'm constantly on the phone. What do you think, final question, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about you and your governorship?
What do you think it is?
No, I'm not in the hot seat.
I think the stereotype that's given to businessmen who run for office, that they're chief executives and they're concerned only about the numbers and not the people. And I've worked very hard. I mean, my first concern is let's think of all of our policies from a people-first perspective and then work back into the numbers. That's why the benefits are different for the most vulnerable versus able-bodied, those types of things, making those distinctions. And I do think that's something that's on me. I mean, it's a partisan election. You're going to be labeled along the way. I think one thing that's great about being governor is you don't get to hide. You're not back in Washington, D.C. You're not just back and forth on a plane. I mean, I'm out and about among people. If I was doing something that people didn't like it, I would hear it at one of my son's practices. I would hear it at school drop-off. And it's not that everyone's wildly happy with everything we've done. Quite the opposite. But I can think through, okay, we did that for a reason. This was our thought process beforehand. And, there's certain things like we were hit early on, if you remember, that we were not as transparent as we should be. There was a sign-in log when you came to the 8th floor.
I was on maternity leave, so you can't blame me for that.
It wasn't you. And the sign-in log was found to not be accurate.
Correct.
And so it was removed. And everyone, or seemingly everyone, wrote that we were trying to keep people from knowing what was happening in the governor's office. Couldn't been anything further from the truth. I said, let's just put the sign-in log back. That's not our intention. It's the wrong perception. That's how we're being painted, how I'm being painted. So when we make a misstep or a mistake, we fix it. We change our mind. I mean, what do you do? I mean, I don't know why so many politicians dig in when they know something's wrong. I think the best thing to do is say, mistake, my bad, let's fix it.
Own it. Well, Governor, thank you so much for being in the hot seat. You're a good sport about it, and thank you all for joining us tonight. And please keep reading us. I know you guys care deeply about our state, and please follow our coverage. Our journey, our mission is to give you the best political and watchdog journalism in the paper. You're not going to find it anywhere else. And I know after our conversation, you probably have a lot of questions of your own. So, Michael?
We only have 60 or 70 more questions to get through before we call it quits
I thought
tonight,
we were done,
so,
Yvonne.
We're done with you.
But the bar
They
is
got a
open.
lot.
The appetizers are still warm, I'm assuming. I didn't get any. So, Governor, the first question from the audience that I'm going to share with you is about prison reform. The person's asking the question, noting that other states have undertaken prison reform and are reducing their prison populations. Meanwhile, Arizona seems to be going the other direction, building additional prisons, additional beds in existing facilities. Are we going the right direction or the wrong direction on prisons?
You know, this is a question I ask everyone that comes up to become a judge. These are people that have been in the legal profession their entire life. I think a lot of people think that there's a right answer and a wrong answer. On some of these questions, I just want to know their answer because I don't know the answer. And one of the questions is, are we putting too many people in prison? And boy, do I get some good answers on that. I do think that prison reform is important. I will give a preview and say that you'll hear a bit about this in the State of the State. We had the prison riot in Kingman earlier this year. I had toured a prison before that as treasurer. I learned a lot through that process. There are people that we are scared of that belong in prison. There are also people that we are mad at that may not belong in prison. I think in an effort, if you were to do a survey in the 70s, you know, you hear a lot about polls and surveys today. If you were to do a survey in the 70s, crime would be a top 3 issue in this country. I'm pretty certain crime doesn't make the top 10. So in the effort to be tough on crime, there were a lot of decisions made, and we are at all-time lows for murder, assault, grand larceny. These are good things that provide a high quality of life for us here in Arizona. At the same time, our prisons are expensive, and I also think it's the idea of justice. I mean, what does someone do that there could be nothing more powerful at the state level than to take someone's liberty or life away in the prison system. Many of the people that are being talked about in terms of prison reform is around drug abuse and addiction. And there are some places around the country, and there's one place around the state that I think is setting a model as to how to do this better. And you're going to hear more about how we can do that to reduce the size of our prison population on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Next question, it says, you've made it clear that you are against Planned Parenthood. If you are against abortion, why would you be against the one organization that does the most to prevent it via contraception and science-based sexual education?
I'm pro-life, and I want to put policies in place that protect the most vulnerable. The issues surrounding Planned Parenthood and that organization were highly concerning to me as governor and someone who was in charge of public policy, and I was outspoken on them. I don't know if I'm in the minority on that or not. It doesn't seem that things have happened at the national level, but I think it's going to be important to point out, you know, there are organizations that provide health care services to women in addition to Planned Parenthood, and I was highly concerned with what was being exposed at Planned Parenthood, and I was outspoken on it.
This question came up a couple of times, and I think we probably need to give a little background. It's wondering why there are triggers in Prop 123. I think that refers to there being certain points at which the legislature wouldn't be obligated to provide the funding outlined in the proposition if state revenue dips to a certain level or whatever. I think the concern is that it would be a backdoor for the legislature then to get out of its obligation to fund schools.
It's a good question, and it's a fair question. I will just say that it was part of the negotiation between the legislators, the legislative leadership, and the education community that we would have spending protection. Part of what happened during the downturn, and I'm hopeful that we won't have a downturn soon, but we know we will have a downturn, is that there would be some type of spending protection around that. The caps are very high. If you take what we're spending on K-12 education, today it's 42% in total of our state budget. The caps don't even come into effect till we get to 49%, and that is outside of the $3.5 billion additional dollars. So whenever you get into these negotiations, especially on things that have a 10-year time frame, you're going to have a lot of what-if possible type scenarios. I would like to see our education spend be more effective, and I'm happy, of course, I'm leading the charge for more resources. But I believe those are in there just in worst case scenarios in case of a dramatic dip in our economy.
Okay, the next one, it says that deregulation has been a focus of your administration, and it asks you to give an example of what some of the regulations you have in mind of getting rid of. Maybe for just brevity's sake, your two favorite examples of needless regulation.
Well, I mean, my favorite example about deregulation is what we found out during Super Bowl week. I mean, a year ago this time, we were getting ready, or we had just given inauguration. We were preparing for the State of the State, and we were interviewing our agency heads and directors. And we heard from one of our agency heads that their plans were to sting Uber during Super Bowl week and to shut them down. And I really wondered, had this individual listened to anything I said during the campaign? I don't know why anyone would express that out loud. And this, what I would say is this was really an overly aggressive agency head, or you could call it, say, regulator or bureaucrat, applying the taxi laws to Uber and Lyft, which are a really neat, innovative app and technology. So we replaced that agency head, we lifted those regulations, and we allowed Uber and Lyft to work during the Super Bowl. A lot of good things have happened since then. I think that's a really good real-world example. Does everybody here know what Uber and Lyft are? Yeah, good. But, I think you don't want to just get rid of all regulation. I mean, regulation should be there to protect the taxpayer, to protect the consumer. But I do think there's a number of things that are a real difference from the business community to being in public office. And in public office, there is a constant drumbeat for more spending, more taxes, more regulation. And if you are not asking the right questions, I think in just an effort to justify a position, you will get more of it. So you want to have regulation that's needed and necessary. And you also, very rarely does anything ever go away in government. Is a law ever sunset? Is a regulation ever stripped away? So, but I think the Uber and Lyft example is the best example I have.
Do you consider yourself to be an introvert or an extrovert?
In my past life, I've been through a lot of different profiling, from Myers-Briggs to predictive index, and I'm about 50-50. I enjoy being out. I like being around people, but at a certain point in time, I kind of run out of charming, and I'm ready to go home. And I'm very comfortable alone. I'm very comfortable, of course, just with my family. I like to read, so I get energy from both, and try to find situations where I can find both.
We'll make this the last one. Do you support Donald Trump for president? I think you've been on the record as where you fall on that. Yeah, we had to go there. But the question that I think the more interesting question here is, what do you think the impact of his candidacy will be on the GOP field and other races on the ticket in the primary and come November 2016?
I think it's a great question. I think it's really yet to be determined. I know that I watched the first debate in August, which was, I think, what many would say would be a meaningless primary debate well over 16 months before the election. And I think there were 24 million people watching that debate. Does anybody know how many people watched Game 7 of the World Series? 15 million.
That guy right there knows.
Yes, he knows that. So I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on this election. I'd like to think that's a good thing. I am concerned about the rhetoric and the style. I do think the idea that some of the political correctness is going away. I mean, I'd like to think that although you've got to poll for answers, I don't know that I've ever surprised you. I mean what I say, and when I want to do something, I'm going to put it out there and then work through the public policy process to get it done. So I think if we could get rid of some of that, that would be a good thing. But where we are right now, I am concerned. I think there's an incredible field of candidates out there to be our next president. we've had a president for 8 years, and the country oftentimes wants to vote for change. I want to make sure we're having that debate. I'll tell you what I think my real concern is. I feel in many ways like we're fighting the last battle. The last time the Republicans were accused of having too many debates and too many forums. It seems like there was one every week, and it was determined there was only one real candidate. Now I think there's a bunch of real candidates. I mean, who do you really tap on the shoulder and tell to leave the stage? The guy that's in last place, who was the 3-term Republican governor of the state of New York? But we're not having debate. We're not having forums. We're having one every 6 weeks. It's like a WWF event, and we're not talking about real policy. So I'd like to see that change.
Is he damaging the Republican brand?
You will only know by the results that happen. I don't know. Donald Trump is on the stage in this field, but we will choose a nominee who will be the standard bearer, and they will speak on behalf of the Republican Party. There has not been a vote cast yet in this primary. It's all been a show.
Well, thank you, Governor, and thank you, Yvonne. Appreciate it.